Chairman Grimson, ambassadors, excellencies, colleagues and friends. My name is Volker Rachold. I'm the chair of the German Arctic office at the Alfred Wegener Institute, and I have the honor and the pleasure to moderate this session on the global consequences of melting ice. So we already heard today that the Arctic is warming much faster than the rest of the globe, actually 4 times faster than the rest of the globe. And of course, this has dramatic consequences for Arctic environments and Arctic people. At the same time, and we also heard that today already, what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic. And it's in particular the melting of ice that has global implications and global consequences. And that's what we want to talk about in this session today. And to start with, let me give just a few things that I have in mind are what we have to think about and what we have to talk about. Firstly, the Arctic as we know it is characterized by the occurrence of frozen water, of ice, and different kinds of frozen water. First of all, we have frozen seawater, we have sea ice. Secondly, we have frozen precipitation, which is fresh water, which is the glaciers and ice caps. And thirdly, we have frozen ground, so the permafrost, where the ice is the cement of the frozen ground. And all of this ice is melting, or respectively thawing, because permafrost is not melting, it's thawing. And of course, this has global consequences. Starting with the sea ice. Melting sea ice, we know today, has an effect on atmospheric circulation patterns. And the hot and dry and long summers we are seeing in Europe last years are directly related to what happens in the Arctic, to the melting of the sea ice in the Arctic. The second thing, of course, is the melting of the Greenland ice sheet and the glaciers and the ice caps, which is a dramatic impact, and today already the biggest impact on the sea level. If you take only Greenland alone, the sea level equivalent of Greenland, if you melt Greenland ice, would be about 6 meters in total. And that's, of course, a dramatic consequence that affects all of us. The third thing is the permafrost. We know and we see that everywhere that the permafrost is warming and thawing, and we know at the same time that there are large amounts of greenhouse gases frozen in the permafrost and stored in the permafrost. And what's happening, of course, is that these frozen greenhouse gases, they are emitted to the atmosphere and further accelerating global warming. So we have a process which makes it even worse. So, and at the end of the day, of course, we know the reason for it, and the reason for that is the anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission that we are introducing into the atmosphere since decades already. And we also know that the longer this continues, the worse it will become. And basically, we also know the answer, because we get to get away from our dependence on fossil fuel, and we have to have a transition into emission-neutral energy. And with that short introduction, I have the pleasure to introduce Minister Þórðarson, who is the Icelandic Minister for Environment, Climate and Energy. And he also used to be the chair of the Arctic Council during the Icelandic chairmanship from 2019 to 2021. So, Minister, please.
Well, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, we need to talk about ice. And liquid water is one of the defining features of planet Earth and an essential component of life as we know it. Seen from space, Earth is a blue planet, but with bright white caps at either pole that expand and retreat with the rhythm of the season. If you go closer, you see smaller white spots all over the globe, even in the tropics. Ice and snow are prominent part of the landscape all over the world, including the much admired Mount Fuji, which watches over Tokyo. More importantly, ice and snow are a critical part of the water cycle in which life depends. Science has found out that in some past periods, Earth was essentially ice-free at the poles. More rarely, hundreds of millions of years ago. Ice covered almost the entire planet. So it would have looked like a snowball from space. Our climate can change greatly, and so can the cryosphere, as scientists call the frozen parts of our planet. But in the last 10,000 years or so, since the end of the last ice age, the climate and the cryosphere has been more or less stable. That is a small blip in geological history, but an eternity for us humans, the entire existence of what we call civilization. The cryosphere has been stable in historic times, that is until the present time, because ice is now in rapid retreat. This is most clearly evident in the Arctic. The most drastic change has been a big retreat of sea ice. We also see thawing of permafrost and loss of ice in glaciers. We have lost dozens of small mountain glaciers in Iceland this century. Our big glaciers are thinning and retreating. They will largely vanish in 1 or 2 centuries with the present trend. Iceland has taken on the role of ambassador of ice, so to speak. We want to highlight the flight of glaciers and the cryosphere, because if we do nothing, the ice is leaving Iceland. If that ever happens, we will already have passed a point of no return. We cannot allow global warming to exceed the limits set by the Paris Agreement, as this can take us into a negative feedback loop with a cascade of unstoppable catastrophes. How is this? Look at Iceland's neighbor, Greenland. Iceland hosts the biggest glacier in Europe, Vatnajökull, but it's a dwarf compared to the Greenland ice cap. A meltdown of the Greenland ice sheet will cause an increase in sea level by 6 to 7 meters. This would spell a disaster for Tokyo, Shanghai, Miami, London, and all low-living islands and coastal areas. If the only negative consequences of carbon emission was the melting of ice worldwide, it would be a reason enough to halt our emission. We need to talk about ice not only in the Arctic. Those small white dots on the globe away from the poles also matters. Glaciers, snow, and permafrost are important features of the water cycle which underpins ecosystems, agriculture, and human economies. The so-called third pole in the Himalayas and nearby mountain ranges is the water tower of Asia, feeding rivers that nourish China, India, and many other countries in Asia. We need better science on ice, and we need action for mitigation and adaptation to the changes ahead. We need to talk about ice at a global level, including at COP28, meeting later this year in United Arab Emirates. The only action that can conserve the cryosphere and avert disaster is cutting carbon emission. This must be our key message. We need to increase awareness of melting ice, and we need to boost regional and international cooperation in cryosphere science and water management.
Thank you very much, Minister. We move on to our second panelist, Hiroyuki Enomoto. He's the Vice Director of the National Polar Institute of Japan, and he's also involved in Arctic research since many, many years. So please.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity. So I'm here maybe because of I'm the scientist, and I'm working with many scientific activities. So just 2 years ago, this stage was for the ASM3, and that time 433 projects are summarized, and that's a very great momentum to the future Arctic research. And then so many international idea was gathered in here in ASM3. And I'm working also, I ask Vice President and who so working with the scientific community, international science community. And today, the global consequence of melting ice is a big, maybe starting point, not the result of the climate change. From melting of ice, many things started, and many cascading effect and complex phenomena will happening. So we should follow what is happening and what will be in the future after the melting of ice. So it's today is the Arctic Circle Japan Forum. Arctic Circle is in latitude, so in geographically defined 60.5 degree north, and from that latitude, the northern area is called high north. 70 degree north. Please imagine the Arctic map. 70 degree north is many countries has a coastline in 70, and between 70 and 80, the sea ice is declining. Not only declining, but the water is absorbing the solar radiation, and warming will be enhanced, and coming the more warming situation. So after the melting sea ice, more warming process is so enhanced. It's a so-called polar amplification. And north of that latitude, 80 degree north, north of the 80 degree north, is still frozen. Even in summertime, the Arctic Ocean is frozen. But IPCC report forecasted in 2050, maybe not every year, but it will happen some year of actually disappearing sea ice, entire Arctic region, including the over 80 degree north. And north of 80 degree latitude is also interest of the Central Arctic Ocean, international water area, and how to observe or how to manage that high international water area is a big interest or concern. But we have no data yet. So the international cooperation in that international water area is a big issue. And when we scan from Arctic Circle latitude to south, there is a land, terrestrial area, many land. So for example, Alaska is just between 60 to 70 degree north. And if, so you are now in Asia, if we go north, so Siberia and Sea of Okhotsk, the northern end of the Sea of Okhotsk is just also 60 degree north. And so that part is 60 to 70, that's a land area. So if you observe 60 to 70 degree north zone, there is a terrestrial zone and permafrost and forest and boreal forest area and also tundra area. In the permafrost area, the permafrost melting or thawing is a big concern. And after thawing permafrost area, methane will be exposed. And that influences the more warming conditions in the future. And recently, many boreal forest fire is happening in that zone. That will also produce the black carbon and reduce the cryospheric reflectivity, and more it enhance more global warming conditions. So many things will happen after the ice melt in those Arctic regions. And on the other hand, this year, Tokyo today is not so cold, but in January we have very cold weather in Japan, and Hokkaido Island recorded minus 30 degrees Celsius. And Japan is a Pacific Ocean side, but the Japan sea side has 3 times more snow depth in this year, 2-3 meters of snow in this January. The weather forecaster or the weather agency detected the origin. The Arctic Ocean has a different synoptic atmospheric conditions that influence to the middle latitude over Eurasia, and come very cold air come to Siberia. Siberia recorded minus 60 degrees Celsius this year. And such a cold air come over warmed Japan Sea area. It's due to global warming, water temperature is warmer. And so more evaporation is coming to the dry so Siberian cold air outburst. Combination of the Arctic and middle latitude is influencing the middle latitude conditions. So complicated, and not looking at the Arctic, but looking together with the middle latitude condition, they will see the future conditions And that is one message from Asia for middle latitude. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we come to questions from the audience, I have 2 or 3 things that I would like to discuss with the 2 panelists. Minister, you were also the chair of the Arctic Council from 2019 to 2021. I was always thinking, looking at the Arctic from an Arctic perspective, I think the Arctic countries themselves should have the strongest interest to protect the Arctic and also to have the strongest voice in the global climate negotiations. I mean, if you look at the emissions, about 15% globally are only from the Arctic countries. But then if you look at that from an Arctic Council perspective, and if you add the observers and you calculate the CO2 emissions from Arctic states plus observers, you end up with 65%, which is a lot. Yeah? So my question is, do you think, or is it a way for the Arctic Council, once it's up and running again fully, to have a stronger voice in this global climate negotiations?
Yeah, well, the short answer is, of course, yes. But just to put things into perspective, then it's important that we know that the good news is that even though the Arctic Council is not working as it did, then the Arctic 7 are in full-fledged with the programs as never before, and Russia with the chairmanship is running their own program and still running the office in Tromsø. But I think that of course we cannot normalize Russian aggressiveness in Ukraine, but we need to find some ways to work together in the Arctic. The stakes are so high, and it's really important that what has been the foundation of the Arctic Council, which the decisions has been built on, is the knowledge, the scientific work which has been cross-border between the Arctic nations in the workshops. That can never be underestimated. So to take one thing out of the work of the Arctic Council, which is so important, is the scientific work, which is the basis for decision. That's the best thing we have to make decisions. But of course we need to. There are 4 million people living in the Arctic, and it's very, very clear that they have to have say in the decision what happens in the Arctic. But most importantly, what is happening in the Arctic is nothing, at least little to do with the 4 million who live there. It's the emission comes from other places, but we need to focus on the Arctic, and we need to listen to both the nations in the Arctic Councils, and hopefully we will see it working as it did before. But also it's really important that the 4 million who live there, they have to have a say in the future and the present of the Arctic.
Okay, thank you. And Hiroyuki, Japan is like Germany observer on the Arctic Council. Do you think this is also an argument, or could also be an argument for Japan, looking at the Arctic and working on the Arctic Council, to have a stronger voice in global climate negotiations?
So it's Japan is working so implementing the Arctic research project, and we thought when we started that project, we thought the stakeholder were where we can give the very good quality data to where is the Arctic Council working group. So we are expected the Arctic Council working groups for environmental issue will summarize and we are waiting some answer from the Arctic Council, but the situation is not allowed now. And last week, I attended the advisory committee of the National Institute of Environmental Studies project. It's a evaluation of the green, so it's a green short-lived climate forces, air pollutions, emission from Asia. So it's a one collaborating work with Korea and China. And it's a maybe great big concern how many emission is coming from the Asian country, and we are now trying to summarize and maybe combine and and also compare the technology. If we have very good quality techniques to comparable, and then it's not only maybe Arctic Council's country, but dialogue can be great with big groups.
Okay, thank you. So, and Minister, you mentioned the science as the basis for decision making, of course. So, and in that context, Germany, together with the European Union and Finland in 2018, organized the second Arctic Science Ministerial, and then Iceland and Japan organized the third one, actually here in the same building. I just learned it was here. I wasn't there, and most people were just there remotely, but it was exactly in this building. And then we heard in the morning that France, possibly together with Norway, are thinking about a fourth one. So, and that is also somehow connected to the Arctic Council, because one of the organizers is the chair of the Arctic Council. That is how it was set up. So, do you think that science is doing enough in terms of supporting policy making, or where are the issues and the problems and the gaps, or why is, let's say, policy not always listening to science?
You started saying that science was, of course, the base for decision making, but I would wish that would be true. This should be that way, but unfortunately it isn't. Well, to look at the positive side, I was the foreign minister for Iceland for 5 years. I think I had maybe 600 bilateral meetings, something like that, during that time. I always raised up the issue of the Arctic, and it was a total difference when I started. The only one who was really interested in the Arctic, had clear views on the Arctic and strategy, was the Asian countries and Russia. But the one who was closer to us, European Union and the Western nation, they were not there first couple of years. It has totally changed. And I think that the positive things is that you mentioned few things that countries which have now, fortunately, and because it's really important, have put in scientific work and want to work together with the Arctic nations. That is a really good sign. But it's all about decision making. You need to have politicians who have a clear vision about where they want to go. And of course, we find it, everyone in this room, so obvious that the Arctic should be a priority. Scientific work in the Arctic should be a priority for the decision making and should be a priority in international politics. But we need to we have work to do to draw attention to that, because we are in a hurry, as we have mentioned, and we don't want to go to a point of no return, as I mentioned before.
Okay, thank you. What's your perspective, Hiroyuki?
Yes, scientists or scientific work is doing, and we are very much willing to useful for decision making. And I work with IPCC report, special report for cryosphere and ocean in the changing climate. And there is a limitation of the role of the science. So IPCC report will provide the useful information to policymaker, but decision, they didn't do decision, or no suggestion. They just show the options. Depending on your decision, making decision, there is a many different options you can choose. And also, IPCC can calculate sea ice change, or snow melting, or future global air temperature, but still very difficult to forecast chemical condition, biological condition, and society condition or society decision. And so it is very uncertain from the limit of the scientific contribution. And using such a scientific report, but we are also make some decision, and also some question from the decision maker is every time welcome. And other point, so as Arctic Council is now not functioning, not fully function, but you have option to compensate that condition. And from a maybe scientific view, don't stop the monitoring. So during the decision making is paused. Monitoring should not stop because we cannot come back to that time. And so the scientists, many scientists is doing that effort. Even the country is not supporting the scientists, but the local scientists, even in Russia, I hope they are doing their research work, continuing. And so it's that's another area, not by making decision, but the monitoring should be continued.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 4 minutes left for questions from the audience. So are there any questions? I think the first hand was over there. Can you say your name and where you're from?
Hi, my name is Viktor Jaakkola. I'm from Helsinki, Finland. And my question to you is, do you support research of solar radiation management techniques like marine cloud brightening, since the IPCC states that Arctic summer sea ice cannot be saved even with very rapid emission reductions? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a good question. I think this is very different from country to country, and maybe we can start with Japan first, really quick.
Yeah. If you solar radiation management, if you say management or geoengineering, we are very much careful because we observe the many nature or phenomena, but we didn't understand completely. And many so for the climate change forecasting or sea ice prediction, we try to maximum effort to the understanding the forecasting, but we failed very much. So every time nature shows a different phase or new dynamic situation. So we are very much careful because if we act to the nature, geoengineering, through geoengineering, we cannot expect what will happen. That is some concern for me.
I think in Germany we're also very careful with that. So what about Iceland, Minister? Can you say a few words?
No, I have nothing to add. We are listening to the specialist, and I am not going to try to. I agree with his analysis.
Okay, we have room for one more question. There was one over there. Yeah.
My name is Hans van der Loof from the Blue Cooling Initiative. I would like to issue a warning to be careful with the use of the term geoengineering. The biggest geoengineering that ever took place on this planet was industrialization, and we were quite comfortable with that. To take all forms of solar radiation management as geoengineering is simply wrong. There are very severe ways of solar radiation management. They are geoengineering, and there are very benign forms which are biomimicry. And the choice we have, and I quite like what you said policy does not listen to science. Well, that is right, but policy will listen to reality. The only problem may be it's then too late. So the choice we have, and tomorrow morning Sir David King will speak about it as well, the severest consequences of our ignorance will only happen towards the latter part of this century. The only time we have to avoid that is this decade. So the question I have, in addition to the scientific dimensions, which is a science area, what do you think is needed in the political area and the engagement area to precisely educate and elucidate that not all forms of solar radiation are geoengineering, some are biomimicry, and that they should be implemented ASAP, because the choice is no longer between good or bad, but between bad and less bad. And it's very important that we wake up to that.
Thank you. I think this is the final question for you, Minister.
Yes, thank you. Well, we need more of Arctic Circle. We can be very grateful for Mr. Grímsson to have founded this platform, and it's of course fantastic that we have seen it in grown, and I'm very serious about this because this has been the best forum for explaining these things, I think, both for policymakers and the public. In my experience, then, we have seen the ones who understand this mostly, even though people are not expert, are the young people. These are the ones who are pushing the older people for change. But I think that the most important thing is that, as you mentioned yourself, is that we are in a hurry. And it means that we need to take brave decisions. And we need to get green very, very quickly. And the good thing is that we can do it. But then is the next thing, are we taking the decision quickly enough to move towards that goal? And well, everything that matters is usually a struggle, but it's worth it. And if I had the one answer, I would not hesitate to tell everyone about it. But I think this is just a fight we need to have to take. The future depends on it, and I was just pleased to hear your good question, and we need more people like you and the others who are here in the room. We need to do more of Arctic Circle, and we need to take this fight, and I'm sure that we can win, but we are in a hurry.
Thank you so much for this very good final words on this session. So I think we're running out of time, 2 minutes over. So thank you both for a good discussion, and we close this session. Thank you.